Welcome to the Great Telco Debate 2020. It's day 2 and we are live on TelecomTV and also streaming on LinkedIn. I'm Guy Daniels and for the next hour I will try and guide us through 2 debates with the help of my colleagues Ray Lemaitre and Chris Lewis. Plus, the full TelecomTV crew is busy off camera making it all work. Now, we're not meeting face to face in London this year, but we are still determined to give you the best possible Great Telco Debate experience. We've split the event over 3 days, Tuesday through to Thursday, and we'll be featuring 2 debates each day. So sit back, turn off your Slack, Teams, Zoom, and the myriad of other so-called productivity services, and for the next hour or so, join us and our guests for the Great Telco Debate. Our first debate today is sustainability as a business reality, not just a CSR tick box exercise. Chris, why are we having this debate and what do we hope to learn?
Well, Guy, the topic of sustainability keeps coming up in many different forms in discussions that we have across the industry. And I think the increasing relevance of the role of telecoms connecting everything and everybody and all those billions and trillions of connections really means that responsibility of sustainability extends out from within the telco out to every aspect of society and the economy, of course. And so looking at it from all those different perspectives, we wanted to start a debate to try and get to see where the telcos are today and how that's likely to shape the future of the telecom industry in the form of sustainability and the way we all deal with it.
Thank you, Chris. Now, hopefully our viewers have already watched the panel discussion and witness statements. If you haven't yet seen these programs, then do try and view them later. They really do help in setting the scene for these live sessions. Of course, this being the Great Telco Debate, we have a motion. And our first motion is the sustainability journey will have a major structural impact on the telecoms industry. Now, as they have done every year, Chris and co-presenter Graham Wild were given their briefs and asked to set out arguments for and against. And here's a summary.
And very much like digitization or automation, the telecoms industry has enabled sustainable practices in other industries. But at the same time, it's being changed by those very practices itself. So I do think that this is really radically changing the way that DSPs are going about their business.
Bringing this all together to say it will shape the industry itself, I think is overstating. Yes, it's part of everything that we do, but at the end of the day, the industry has to be economically viable. And I suspect that in many of the boardrooms where this is discussed, that the sustainability issue, whilst being aired, is superseded by the issue of getting the business right for the future.
Before we find out how our viewers voted on the motion, we've got time for a further round of questions. And I'm delighted that many of our expert witnesses have returned for our live shows. And we're also joined by some new faces, all of whom have plenty of views and ideas to share. Now, half of our guests are here with Chris and me, and the other half are with Ray. And we've mixed things up to ensure we put the great in Great Telco Debate. So, pun aside, let's welcome Gema Esteban Garrido, who is ESG Investors and Non-Financial Reporting Director at Telefónica. Gabrielle Ginér, who is Head of Environmental Sustainability at BT Group. Bill Chang, CEO Enterprise Group at Singtel. Phil Skipper, Head of IoT Business Development at Vodafone. And Phil Sorsky, SVP Sales Service Provider at CommScope. Welcome everyone, good to see you all again. Now it's over to my colleague Ray Lemaitre and his gallery of guests. Good morning, Ray. All set for another day of the Great Telco Debate?
Absolutely. We had a great live session yesterday. I know we're going to have another great one today. 2 fantastic motions to debate. So without further ado, let's get on to the questions we've got from the gallery of guests I have here with me. So the first question today is coming from George Power, who is Senior Vice President at Macquarie Bank. So George, over to you.
Thank you, Ray. So my question comes back to the point of the opportunity of circular business models. We discussed previously that circular business models for smartphones, such as rental or swap models, they present a really unique win-win for the customer, where the customer can save, let's say, 20% on the cost, but also the environment in terms of less emissions. So given this win-win opportunity, my question is, are telcos missing out by not embedding circularity and sustainability into their core offering, and thus leaving the high ground to the OEMs such as Apple? Or put another way, is this another example of where telcos need to decide if they are just network providers or also true service providers?
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, George. Well, that's a really important question. There's billions of smartphones in the world, of course. So, Guy, back over to you to get some answers to this question.
Thank you, Ray. And also thank you, George, for the great question. Well, Gabrielle and Gema were both part of the earlier panel discussion around sustainability. Gema, perhaps I could turn to you for a response to George's comments.
Sure. Well, first of all, congratulations for this great telco debate. And well, yeah, circularity is very important. And I would say that most of the telcos are embracing this. And we have a number of initiatives where we are being conscious of that, the digital wasting that we are producing, not only by smartphones, but also cables and many things. And I think that we are, at least in Telefónica, we are embracing this, and we are fully, we have programs and we have put in place ways to really recycle the smartphones that we are putting in the hands of our customers. And for example, in our case, we are recycling this and sending routers to Latin America, and we have a number of initiatives where we are ending up in 98% of our waste being recycled. So I would say that there will be, and there are many initiatives in the industry, and we are quite conscious of this. And I would say that we are very much a service provider rather than just a pure network provider.
Thank you, Gema. Good clarity there as well. Gabrielle, what about BT on the issue of recycling and reuse?
Yeah, I think it's critical to how we do our business. So I just wanted to give an example of how we're focused on this. So with our suppliers, we run a game-changing challenge competition, which is a bit like a dragon's den, where we ask suppliers to come in and pitch new ideas for innovation. And actually, this year our focus is on the circular economy, and we will be selecting winners from our supply chain around that in January. So I'll keep you posted.
That sounds great. I'm in, as they say. Well, unless any of other guests have any comments to add, perhaps we should head back to Ray. Yeah, let's head back to Ray. Oh, Bill, before we go back to Ray, let's bring in Bill.
Yeah, no, I just sharing in Singtel's on this sustainability efforts, circularity, it's an important area. We have over every year and for the last 3 years accumulated obviously distribution of a lot of smartphones, and as people upgrade them, we basically put up a massive campaign to allow people to drop off all this e-waste, and 46,000 kilograms of this. As I think about that, it's heavier than a T-72 tank, like they say. And we collect them and we recycle them, and some of this refurbish, and then to really make to allow some of the folks who are the lower income and elderly folks who needed some of these devices to be to have access to them, and at the same time also recycling a lot of this to ensure the environmental friendliness in what we're doing over here in Asia.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I think before we go back, Phil Sorsky has a comment to make as well.
Yeah, just one point. We're Comscope. We don't make mobile phones, but we do supply over 10 million in-home devices in terms of set-top boxes and broadband gateways and so on. And what we're finding is that because of the conscientiousness of the telcos, they're driving us and our competitors very hard in terms of sustainability, both in terms of elimination of single-use plastics. So we're up to about 70-80% of recycled plastic within the devices. We're up to about 100% of no single-use plastics in the packaging when these devices get shipped. And also the power consumption is on a downward trend, so they're becoming greener than ever. And one of our customers in Poland recently launched what they called their greenest IPTV set box ever, and the demand has been phenomenal. So there's a strong linkage between sustainability and keeping the customer happy.
Thank you very much, Phil. Well, let's go back to Ray and let's get some more comments from Ray and George.
Okay, yes, thanks. George, we want to come back to you now. Is this a big opportunity missed? I mean, is any of this in the core messaging from the operators?
Well, as I see it, there's, of course, a huge amount of activity going on, but I don't see many operators really building circularity into the core offering. We're not just talking about recycling phones when they come to the end of the life. It's actually about changing customer behavior, about how they use their hardware, how they think about their hardware, kind of from the beginning of the contract. If you rent a phone, for example, you have a very, very different attitude to how you treat it, how you use it, and which encourages preservation of that hardware, and also because you've got to return it at the end. And that's what I don't see, and what I think is the really exciting opportunity is people putting those business models right onto their homepage, not at the bottom of the homepage where you talk about trade-in, but really at the front of the homepage. This is what our network, what our operator really stands for, and I think it could be a really exciting opportunity.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks very much, George. Great comments there. Good start to today's great telco debate.
Ray, if I could just jump in, we've got some even more responses from our end over here, because Phil Skipper, you'd like to make a comment on what George has just said.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting point, because what the telco has, it has both the supply side contact and the demand side. So I think what we've done within Vodafone, sustainability is very, very high on the agenda. But we've also done things like we're starting to encourage that consumer demand to change by adding things like Fairphone to our portfolio. So it's starting to become something that if you can get the customer demand behind it, it's going to pull through a lot of these business models.
Thank you, Phil. And a quick extra comment from Gabrielle.
Yeah, just on the rental model. So that's actually something that we've introduced for our set-top boxes and consumer devices. So our customers are now, under their contract, actually obliged to return their equipment to BT at the end of life of the contract.
Thank you. And let's go over to Chris and make it a full house.
Thank you, Guy. I think what this indicates straight away is just how wide-reaching this is, that it affects every part of the business. And to Phil Skipper's comment, that the supply and the demand side really important. This reaches throughout. And I think raising the awareness of it, of course, is one issue. But of course, executing against it, to George's point, it is absolutely essential. So sustainability, in many ways, it's a bit like topics like security and AI. It just affects every aspect of what we're talking about across the whole of the industry.
Thank you very much, Chris. Back to you, Ray. And I promise it really is back to you now.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Well, now I'm going to come to Dean Bubley, Director at Disruptive Analysis. And Dean has got a question about trade-offs and sustainability. So, Dean, over to you.
Hi there. Thanks, Ray. I'm curious about how the telecoms industry is going to handle some of the complex trade-offs in future between the sustainability aspect of networks and some technology constraints. So what do we do if we find out that, let's say, Open RAN uses more energy than proprietary optimized versions? Or do we need to sort of try to think about least energy routing in networks rather than least cost or lowest latency or highest throughput? Yeah, what frameworks do we need to deal with managing those trade-offs?
Okay, great question, Dean. Thanks very much. Guy, over to you in the studio.
Yeah, thanks, Ray, and thanks, Dean, for the question. Gema, what do you think of Dean's comments?
Yeah, well, I think that it's a very, very good question from Dean, no? and that it is a challenge that we have, no? But I think that fortunately the new technologies are conscious of this, and they are quite less energy consuming. No? Look at 5G, for example, which is 90% less energy consuming than the previous technologies. No? So I guess that the answer, which is, and the real challenge that we have as an industry, is how to cope with the increase of traffic that is going exponentially through our networks, and to try to stop or at least freeze the energy consumption that we have, right? I think from our point of view, it's a question of strategy. It's a question of being conscious of what you want to do, being conscious that you need to stop emissions and you need to at least freeze your energy consumption, and do things together with vendors and together with and using technology to meet that goals. And let me give you an example, which I guess that is quite known by us, which has been how we launched our first green bond in the telecom industry with funds that were devoted to replace the copper infrastructure in Spain. So substituting fiber to the home in Spain, and removing and get rid from all the copper in Spain. That was very, very much energy efficient, because we were closing up all the premises that were devoted to copper and getting rid from all the copper infrastructure in Spain. This has had a huge energy efficiencies and energy gains, which has been even higher than the ones that the pure technology bring to the customer, because of we were closing down premises and closing down infrastructure. So it's a way of not only the technology and what technology is enabling you to do, is the way in which you strategically deploy the technology.
Thank you very much, Gema, for that. Great, and a really nice example there. Chris, you want to jump in?
I think Dean raised a very, very interesting point. I think during the debate we had yesterday about the open telco, one of the points raised by Hanif from Digicel was that, at the board level, these topics need to be raised, and they need to be aware about the decisions being made, perhaps at one individual technology level, how that impacts the whole picture. And this is it's a much wider ranging impact on the industry than just on one particular piece of technology. So as long as there is a framework for decision making across the organization, as long as there's buy-in at the board level all the way up, and it's in my head the phrase sustainability equates to responsibility. And that's both in terms of the organizations, the way they run, but it's also the way they work with technology, and of course what they spend their money on. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting point about where things get invested.
All right, thanks, Chris. Well, let's go over to Bill at Singtel and get Bill's views as well.
So if you think about what happened in the COVID initial months, where lockdowns are happening across the globe, and certainly in Singapore, many countries in this region, actually, the role that telecom service providers play are so key in enabling everybody from, people moving to the cities, moving into the central business districts, and all this, massive carbon footprint that we leave with the transport systems and all that, and having them to very rapidly move and work from home on alternate sites, right? And dispersing the whole population in a way that causes this disruption. And I think the energy usage in a large extent, the travel cost and all that, we played a key role in that. Without this telecom service provider providing the essential services, I just don't think how economies will be able to support. So I think I'd like to sort of highlight a very key point that we played, all the telcos around the world. And you think about what we do, for example, we've got a goal to drive towards carbon neutral, net zero emission by 2050 as a sort of a company pushing to that. And you think about things like our data centers, for example, where there is a moratorium on building new data centers in the country because of carbon footprint. we have to think about upgrading and making key decisions in upgrading old data centers that cannot take the kind of efficiency expectations of PUE, and therefore, making those investments to upgrade it and to really increase the yield of this whilst managing the efficiency. And this, would take massive capital expenditure and decisions in driving to that, again, based on the goals of how do we want to manage this whole carbon footprint.
Thanks, Bill. Phil Skipper, I think you wanted to come in as well.
Yes, I think it's a great question. I think for me, what you have to also consider, and you asked about this balance between carbon neutrality and the business case. We're building a green network right now, but underneath that, of course, you've got to remember that energy is one of the raw materials of connectivity. And if you were to look at this from a manufacturing industry, of course, that is a major component in what the end customer price looks like. So I think there's real value on both sides, from reducing the raw material cost, which is the energy in, to actually converting that into much lower carbon telecommunication services. So I think there's a very good balance there.
Thank you very much, Phil. We could talk about this question for a long time, because I think we've got a lot of interest from our guests, but I am conscious of the time, and we do need to get a few more questions in. So thanks very much for the time being, and let's go back to Ray and his guests.
Thanks, Guy. Well, I'm just going to bring in Mansoor very quickly on this topic. He is engaged in a big planning, a big new rollout. Mansoor, on the trade-offs question, a very quick comment here from you.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it quick, but to Dean's question. So first of all, the Open RAN example, I think it highlights that there's a huge space for trade-offs, but there are also red lines. So in the case of Open RAN, I think if it was to significantly increase the power consumption, I can't see any large-scale operator in societies where the sustainability is an issue actually going with that. So I think there's a red line. And we should note that it's for over a decade now that telcos and providers have been trying to reduce power consumption from base stations. And that was originally driven only by economic factors and the cost. But now it's about sustainability. So I think that there's a red line in terms of anything that goes against the tide and goes in the opposite direction will be considered as if we're going back to 2G or going back to 3G if it increases power consumption. So those are red lines. Within those red lines, you're absolutely right. Trade-off is the key. And here in NEOM, for example, we're trying to have modular cities that are actually designed for sustainability and livability. And the power consumption within those modules is really something that we're calculating from the beginning. And that trade-off between latency, cost, performance, and power consumption is something we're building into the system so that people will have transparency about where the trade-off is and can actually know what energy they're using every time they're making a call.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Mansoor. The time is flying by. We want to get at least one more question here on the sustainability question. So let's come to Ross Singleton, who is chair of UK 5G. Ros, over to you.
Thank you. So many countries have huge, poorly routed, inefficient, old networks full of old bits of equipment and old kit. I think we all know this, whether they're fixed networks or mobile networks. We also know that data usage pressure is increasingly upwards. So I was wondering if the participants would agree that it was time to do something significantly more drastic to bring the carbon cost per bit down, and maybe think about how we do these things. For example, in the UK, we have 4 MNOs all building various bits of infrastructure, albeit some of it shared. Is that really the most effective way to do this? If you look at how we do things with shared infrastructure from Openreach, for example, isn't that sort of thing more efficient? So that's a question I'd like to ask. Is it just time to do something more drastic? It's not going to get easier.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Ros. Great question. So, Guy, over to you to get some responses. Is there more that can be done in terms of network sharing and getting rid of all that old kit?
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Well, let's get some views from our guests over here. And if we could keep our answers as short as we can so we can hear from as many as we can, because I think a lot of us want to get involved in this one. Gema, let me start with you.
Okay, I will be very, very quick. I would say that at least, I agree with you, Ross. I mean, I think that we need to find out new ways to deploy network infrastructure, because our balance sheet oblige us to do that. And that I think that we are doing things that are quite aggressive, and we are sharing networks more and more. We are setting up, for example, in Telefónica, fiber coasts in Brazil. We are getting rid from, as I said at the beginning, from all the copper in Spain and having a full new network and infrastructure. So I think that we need to do that, but we need to involve the regulator here, which is a huge thing, at least in Europe.
Thank you, Gema, indeed. Gabrielle, do you have any views on this one? And I know also you wanted to jump in on the back of the last question as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the energy efficiency that we talked about. And I think for us as an operator, it makes absolute sense to look at how we drive down our energy consumption. So we last year reduced our energy consumption by 2.3%, and we've been reducing it year on year for the past 10 years because that helps the bottom line. So in the past decade, we saved 343 million pounds through our energy efficiency programs.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. And Chris, did you want a quick comment in that one?
It was just a very quick comment in the sense that when we get onto the motion, you know, the implications, the sustainability is about, I think, as someone said in the initial program, I think it may have been Mansoor, which it's the efficient use of resources. And so we do need to look very closely at the resources that we use to build up all the way from energy, all the way through the different networks, and we need to take the waste out of that. And I agree with Gema that we do need to have the regulators involved, we need governments involved, because at the end of the day, it's about individual countries and building that sustainability from that economic and societal point of view.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I think we can get a quick response from Phil Sorsky as well.
Yeah, just in terms of energy consumption, I think is in top 3 costs for any telco, particularly on the wireless side. So I don't see O-RAN and energy consumption as necessarily conflicting. I think in the end, they'll head in the same direction because of business needs. But to Rod's question, I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. We need to move beyond the physical site sharing that we have today, where 2 or 3 operators may share a tower, and actually get into network and even power consumption efficiency sharing, as it were. But that will take some kind of regulation and probably leverage of the absolute latest in terms of technology that we can deploy today.
Thank you very much, Phil. And I think we should head straight back to Ray.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Guy. Well, the time has flown by. We've got to the end of our time for the sustainability motion. So I think it's now time for us to find out whether the motion is carried or not. So I'm going to ask my guests up here in the first class gallery. I'm going to read the motion and then ask everybody to vote with a thumbs up or thumbs down. So the motion is, a reminder, the sustainability journey will have a major structural impact on the telecoms industry. So could everybody give a thumbs up or thumbs down about whether you agree or disagree with that motion? Okay, it's a full house here, Guy, from the gallery, 100% in favour. Back over to you to find out what your guests think and what the TelecomTV audience thinks.
Wow, thank you very much, Ray. That's the first clean sweep we've had. Let's do a quick thumbs up, thumbs down from our business lounge here. Don't forget, the motion is the sustainability journey will have a major structural impact on the telecoms industry. If we agree, if we disagree. Oh, look at that. There's always one who puts his thumb down, and that happens to be me. Otherwise, we would have had a complete thumbs up across the board. Great, thanks very much for that. Well, that's what we all think. Pretty positive, mostly. But what about our audience? What about the TelecomTV audience? Was our motion carried or defeated? Well, it's time for the industry to decide.
Wow.
Whoa, what a turn up for the books. Wow. Well, there you have it. Motion defeated. says our wide audience with a huge sample size, but only just. Chris, you presented the case against the motion. What do you make of that result?
Well, Guy, as everyone is aware, Graham and I literally tossed the GTD commemorative coin to decide who speaks for and against it. But I'm delighted in the way that this audience and the broader audience has engaged with the discussion. The big question is how far through the organisational structure this sustainability question goes, and how far does it drive ultimate strategy. And this is why we talked about it coming out of the CSR department and being part of mainstream business. I think, as many people have said, there is still a long way to go. I don't think anybody doubts the motivation, the drive behind it, but there's a lot of changes required, structural, political, and of course regulatory.
Thanks, Chris. Personally, seriously, I would hope that the sustainability journey does have a major structural impact on the telecoms industry, and in fact every industry, not just telecoms. But I live in hope. Ray, any thoughts from you on the motion result?
Well, a bit of a surprise after the general thumbs up we had here. But I guess this, as Chris says, this just goes to show how much more communication of what's going on in this industry needs to get out, even just within the industry, let alone to customers. So lots of great work going on, but lots of, I guess, marketing and communication to do about what is happening.
Good point. We are in the communications business after all. That's exactly what's needed. So that's the first debate concluded, but don't go away because we promised you 2 debates today. And so without even pausing for breath or breaking to pour another espresso shot, let's get straight into our second debate, which asks the question, how can we keep the customer satisfied? Is it time for the telcos to finally get real? Chris, why this conversation? Why are we having this conversation, and what's at stake for the industry?
Well, Guy, delighted that the topic of keeping customers happy came up during the sustainability debate in terms of things that the telcos might do to make that whole situation better. But as ever within this discussion about the role of the telco, we talk about customers, both consumer and businesses, and the role that connectivity plays. And we talk about very low NPS scores relatively in the telecom industry, and the fact that we're now part of a much broader digital ecosystem where the services being consumed, the content being consumed, the activities being done are actually outside of the control of the telco. So can the telco, with whatever it does around connectivity and adjacent services, can they keep those customers happy, or is it out of their hands?
Thank you, Chris. And of course, every great telco debate needs a motion, and our second motion today is telcos are in the optimum position to manage customer happiness in the increasingly digital world. And here's a summary of what Chris and Graham argued for when we tossed the GTD commemorative coin last week and introduced the debates.
In brand terms, we talk about awareness and affinity. So people have been aware of the telco in the past, but had little affinity. As the service becomes more reliable and it becomes part of everything that we do in our business and personal lives, then that affinity starts to kick in and builds a stronger relationship, and people more likely to add other services on top of that connectivity layer.
A major source of happiness or satisfaction that comes from consuming services over a telecoms network is actually generated by those OTT players like Netflix and Spotify, Google, and so on. I think telcos, we need to stick to our knitting. We need to provide great connectivity, great coverage, but that's ultimately not going to drive great happiness.
Well, we'll soon find out the results of the viewer vote on the motion. But before we do, we have time, of course, for a final round of questions. Our industry guests are still with us, so let's get right to it. Ray, over to you for our first question for this second debate.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Guy. And our first question on this topic comes from Ian Fogg, who is VP of Analysis at Opensignal. Ian, over to you.
Sure. So clearly, we've had an unusual year, massive economic pressure in many countries. What does that mean for satisfaction and what the service providers have to do? We had a look in Italy, and we could see in a market that's perceived to be very price sensitive because of the arrival of Iliad, that actually those consumers that churn, which is the ultimate dissatisfaction, you leave your operator, you leave the service provider, we could see those that left had a worse experience on their original network before they left. They had more time with no signal, less time with 4G connection. Really basic stuff around making sure that the core kind of experience works really well. And I guess thinking ahead to 2021, clearly there's going to be ongoing economic shocks on the back of what's happened in 2020. What does service providers have to do to kind of make sure they maximize their customer satisfaction and avoid kind of price pressure?
Okay, great question, and surely a question that's at the very near the top of all the strategy and planning discussions going for 2021. Guy, over to you for some feedback on this question.
Thank you, Ray, and thanks to Ian for the question. So that's it. What do telcos need to do to keep their customers satisfied and avoid the price pressures? Do we have anybody who want to address Ian's question first? Chris, well, let's start with Chris. Come on.
I think this is so fundamental to the future of the industry that we get carried away with what new services are going to do, what new layers on top we might put in place. But fundamentally, and Phil Jordan made this point of the CIO, the group CIO from Sainsbury's in the program recording, that actually what he wants from the telcos is ubiquitous, reliable connectivity, and then to deliver that in the context of the business in which he operates. And I think we all feel that the same for as consumers as well. So it's a question in my mind of making sure that we do what we're supposed to do properly, focus on that, and then the additional stuff can be dealt with later on. So we should the whole purpose, the raison d'etre of telco is to deliver connectivity, and surely in this year especially, we've become more reliable on that, and therefore that ubiquitous, reliable connectivity is the absolute issue. Chris,
you really got this plain old broadband POP acronym front and centre now, haven't you? We're going to make a big thing of it. Indeed. Gema, would you like to comment on Ian's question?
Yes, I would like to comment because I think that this is a sustainability thing. And I know that we have changed the debate, but I think, and it is not, sustainability is not about being green, at least for telcos. I think that the first and the most important thing for us is customer satisfaction and how we treat our customers, how we digitalize our customer relationship and these things. So for me, this is a must. This is something I absolutely agree with Chris. This is something that we need to take into account as a priority. As a matter of fact, for example, one of our 4 non-financial KPIs that is included in the remuneration of our CEO and COO and the rest of the company is NPS, no? For example, as many other telcos. No? So this is critical. This is something that we need to do. And just because one thing, because I think the digital world has raised the bar for this. So as soon as you're a customer of Amazon or Google or other of the big over-the-top players, the bar has raised. So we need to cope with this, and this is very, very critical for us. And we need to close and follow this from I would say, a holistic point of view.
Thank you very much, Gema. And we do like to have common threads running throughout all our debates on the Great Telco Debate. Phil Skipper, let's get some comments from you.
Yes, I think what the COVID situation has shown us is what does true customer happiness look like? So, I come from the IoT business, so I have a slightly different perspective. But if I look at what we've done inside of Vodafone in order to get our customers into remote working very quickly, to actually provide new services and tariffs, particularly for customers who are finding it difficult in these times, I think it's not just about connecting people so that when they press the green button, the phone rings. It's actually about providing an additional layer of service. And I think this is around how you package connectivity to make it really appropriate to customers when they're moving in different situation and conditions. And I think COVID has added another dimension to how we look at what makes customers happy. And I think we've done a lot in terms of flexing our propositions to fix that right now.
Thank you, Phil. That's great. Unless any of our other guests want to address this one, let's head back. Phil Solsky.
Yeah, just on this point, I think that I agree with Chris and Phil Jordan's point that being very good at connectivity for a telco is a prerequisite, and there's nothing wrong in if that's your only objective. But in order to stop the price pressures, which I think was in the question, what can they do to stop the price pressures? It's creating this stickiness beyond just providing good connectivity, because you'll quickly be forgotten if all you do is provide excellent connectivity. And now telcos don't have the best track record of creating the next new thing, if you like, the next new Spotify, the next new OTT service. So the only way from a consumer point of view, I think, the telcos can resist that price pressure is partnering with either the established OTT players, the likes of a Spotify, or the new up-and-coming ones, which it's anybody's guess what they will be. Because the telcos themselves, indigenously, have maybe not been that quick to market. So for me, it's all about partnership, and whether that's in the consumer space or the business space, in terms of really digging into verticals like retail, for instance, in Phil Jordan's case. So I think it's a partnership approach for beyond that connectivity.
Great, thank you very much, Phil. Well, let's head back over to Ray.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guy. Well, we've got some comments on this topic here in the gallery as well. So I'm going to come to Ros Singleton. Ros, what do you have to say on this topic?
So one of the things I think is interesting in the consumer market, and I do think we have to be very clear that there are a number of markets for telecoms, and they're not all consumer, though we do tend to talk about that. But in the consumer market, at least, very bundled products are what customers quite often will buy because they get better value for money for it. And it is that simple. Quite often it's not because it's the best telecoms provider or the best TV provider, but a bundle that provides them what they need at a certain price point. But that being what it is, how do you then separate those factors out, given that quite often that will come from a number of different suppliers? For example, if you buy a mobile broadband and TV bundle, you might actually reasonably be a customer of Vodafone, but only really the mobile portion will be provided by them at that point, and the rest of it will really be through third-party suppliers. So how do you manage that is my question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ros. And George, you want to come in here as well? George from Macquarie Bank.
Yeah, so just when we're thinking about how telecoms companies can resist that relentless price pressure, it is worth sort of coming back to good old Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. We think about it from a telecoms perspective. The base layer is connectivity and communication, collaboration, being able to work and play, and then the final level is kind of self-actualization typically, and the higher up you go on that pyramid, actually the less price sensitive I think potentially customers are, because you're really kind of reaching to what's important for them. And I don't think responding to the sustainability topic is a means to extract more margin necessarily. That's not the purpose. But if telcos are thinking about how to resist price pressure, differentiating themselves on something that's more of a purpose, I do believe, and I'd be interested to get views, could be a way to resist that.
Okay, great. Thanks, George. And Mansoor, you want to come in here as well?
Yeah, I always find, back in my telco days, I always found it amazing that, the NPS scores, so the customer satisfaction scores that we all were obsessed about, they were consistently led by the virtual mobile operators, even on themes such as the network itself. When you knew that an MVNO would not have its own network, they would still get a higher score on the network than the networks which actually had networks, which is baffling in a way. But I think, there was many debates about what does that mean in terms of why is customer satisfaction so high for the virtual operators. My personal conclusion is only that because they are working really on customer satisfaction itself, the customer journey, customer services, and they have this complete focus on that, that's where they got the edge in making sure the customers are satisfied. Now, that's my personal conclusion. There might be many other conclusions, but I do think what that means is the wider operators that do have physical networks, even though they are increasingly making efforts to make sure customers are satisfied, the customer journey is right, the customer service is more and more central, there's still more to be done there. And I think that shift is required really to allow telcos to really make sure customers are fully satisfied.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mansoor. And Guy, I think we need to come back to you for further comment on this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Just briefly, I think, Gema, you want to add a comment to this?
Yes, I just wanted to say that we need maybe to look into different places. And just learning from what has happened in COVID-19 crisis, what we have seen, for example, in Spain and in other countries, where telecoms has been one of the three industries that were supporting the economics and the economies and the countries where we were living together with electricity and with food. We have been the ones that allowed people to connect, to communicate, to relate, to work, to everything. No? And what happened after that, just with our and many other operators like Vodafone and many others did at the very beginning of the crisis, is that our NPS went up like 20-30%. Okay, during the COVID-19 crisis. So we need to go up on the Maslow pyramid. I agree with you, George, very much, and maybe look into other different places rather than things that we have been traditionally looking at. No?
Thank you, Gema. Thank you very much. Ray, thanks for that. Back to you, though.
Okay, thanks, Guy. And Ian, so lots of comments on your question here. Let's come back to you to get a final comment.
I think it's a fantastic discussion here because I think, as Chris highlighted, there's a balancing act. Customers expect ubiquity of service. If they don't have it when they're in the wrong part of the country or it doesn't work at the wrong hour of the day, that creates dissatisfaction. But equally, operators and providers have to roll out new technologies to raise that bar, to raise speeds. What's an acceptable speed today is very different to what was an acceptable speed 5 years or 10 years ago, and vice versa. So you have to keep innovating to meet rising consumer expectations. And it's important to roll out new Gs, new technologies like 5G that gives people average speeds in the hundreds of megabits. If you don't, you'll get dissatisfaction. But if you do that for some people, not everyone, you're going to risk dissatisfaction there. So this is a balancing act. Getting that good enough connectivity for everyone, but also continue to innovate and continue to meet rising consumer expectations. It's a challenge.
Absolutely, it really is. And the telcos, I think, have many years of experience of trying to meet that challenge. And so it will continue on into 2021 and beyond. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Ian. So let's move on to the next question in our Keeping the Customer Happy debate here. And this is from Dean Bubley, Director at Disruptive Analysis. So Dean, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. How do we deal with customer service and satisfaction for enterprises, particularly around 5G? I'm thinking about things like network slicing and ultra reliability. What's the mechanism so that when a large customer calls up and says, my slice isn't working, my factory's offline, it's costing me $1 million an hour? How do you resolve that and keep the customer happy when there's maybe third parties involved with indoor coverage and all sorts of complexity? And I suppose linked to that is, as part of ultra reliability, taking liability.
Okay, excellent. Well, quite literally the $1 million question there from Dean. Guy, over to you for some answers to this question.
Yeah, thanks, Ray, and thanks, Dean. It's a big one. Look, Bill, we haven't heard from Bill for a while. Bill, would you like to comment from Singtel's perspective on keeping the enterprise customers satisfied?
Yeah, thank you. The point about 5G enterprise, this is a major focus for us because really the properties of 5G in low latencies and also network slicing and the MEC, multi-access edge computing platform that goes along with it, and all delivering a very low latency of sub 5 milliseconds. The real use case is actually in enterprises. I mean, the consumers who have we've done the rollouts here, it's 1.2 gigs, 1.2 gigabit per second, but that's, as much as you want to need on a 5G phone, but really it's the enterprises that's going to see the benefits. At the moment, we're in the midst of trials and rolling out, with a number of customers who are very excited about the potential in many industries, in the ports, in public safety areas, in defense, in areas that are also related to a number of manufacturing, advanced manufacturing locations, airports, and all that. So the challenge as depicted with the complexity of a 5G network, essentially it's a software-defined network with all these capabilities of network slicing, the resiliency, the cybersecurity, the platform with all its compute and data analytics, and also the AI kind of capabilities that we've built on it to, whether it's solving use cases like autonomous guided vehicles in ports, autonomous drones flying and inspecting buildings, to things that are, public safety, smart glasses for people administering public safety, smart sensors in critical areas like airports and all that. So I think there are many, many sort of interesting use cases. Obviously, this is the early phase of it. A lot of thought has got to go into security by design because of mission criticality. It's got to go into areas that are also related to the resiliency and the network functionality that allows us to be able to do things at all sub 5 milliseconds. And in our group, we've got a very big system integration arm that is very huge in its digital services. So to the question that I think George from Macquarie asked earlier, to what layers does telcos build up from their core infrastructure all the way up to services? We have a very unique model. Our enterprise business is actually 53% non-telecom services and 47%. And over the next 5 years, it will probably be 60-40, given the growth rate of our digital services, and that's growing above telecom. So we've got a lot of interesting things that we're doing for building the smart nation in Singapore. The infrastructure is important, ensuring connectivity, ensuring the collaboration and the communications piece. But at the same time, the cybersecurity that goes around ensuring trust. And therefore, what are some of the infrastructure services into the on-prem and at the edge, and applications that are being deployed also for digital services, and AI, very important, data analytics when the clients all need this around the 5G. So we have a very huge arm of ICT services, we call them, above the infrastructure. That's bigger than our infrastructure business. And that's the growing part. And the infrastructure is critical. It's about resiliency. It's about trust. It's about, kind of efficiency in deploying these capabilities at a platform level.
Excuse me, Bill. Let me just jump in. I've got a quick question from a viewer here who's listening to your response and says, "But what happens when things go wrong? If things go wrong with these enterprise services, what happens then?"
Yeah. So I think if it goes wrong, we have to design in with the customers with regards to having the resiliency, right? And sometimes it may mean having two platforms, two customers, two service providers in there. Because ultimately, if the services, it goes down, there are going to be implications. And so therefore, we have to work with the customers to ensure that there are multiple networks and resiliencies in there. If it's just dependent on one sole network, when I say a network, it could be a 5G from us, with a fallback on our 4G or Wi-Fi 6 in a factory, or maybe another operator that will have resiliency, because you got to think from a customer standpoint, how do you design that with the resiliency in there? And because no operator will say that their networks will never go down. It's a question of ensuring how many nines we get in our services, and at the same time, the customer end, what do we need to do to architect those networks to allow multiple infrastructures to work together seamlessly to ensure, that downtime is kept to a bare minimum.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate that. Good comments. Chris, you want to jump in?
I do. Thank you very much. I think the question around, especially around the enterprise side, is of course very specific to every business. What we're seeing a lot of times, and I know Dean and a lot of us have been looking at the issue of private networks, is that actually the integration role seems to be almost the upper role in the way these services get rolled out. So the relationship, the partnering between telcos, integrators, application providers, and specialist vertical providers is absolutely vital. So the communication across those lines is key. The question, I guess, is whose throat is there to be choked at the end of the day, and that's hence Dean's liability question, which is if you're running a business on this and you propose a very reliable service, then you've got to be prepared to carry the liability, which in many cases as telcos certainly have not done in the past. So I think it does raise much bigger questions about partnerships, relationships, and the way the telco fits into that new, whether we call it Industry 5.0 now, I'm not sure, but a big question from my side.
Thank you, Chris. And with that, back to Ray.
Okay, thanks, you guys. We have plenty of comments on this in the gallery as well. So I'm going to come to Ros Singleton next. So, Ros, what do you have to say on this topic of enterprise customer relationships?
Yeah, I think the very specific question Dean put, which included slicing, was quite deliberate. I don't think that was a random selection. And I think, probably one of the ways that in the real world for MNOs, slicing for industry may not always be something they're particularly going to be able to sell, not just because of the large upfront costs, but actually because it changes their operating model so very much. And particularly, across Europe, as the MNOs divest themselves of their networks effectively and become retail operations, these things are going to be harder and harder and harder to insure against, whether they're self-insuring or passing that on. And so from my perspective, I think that's actually quite interesting. And the only answer I would have from having run private networks before, and particularly private wireless networks, is you have to have disaster recovery rehearsals. It's old-fashioned stuff. There is nothing newfangled in 5G or any of the other Gs that allow you to manage for catastrophe, right? That all comes down to human and process and timings and these sorts of things. So that would be what I would say is the answer. It's still going to come down to really good people managing a network. And if the worst happens, you scramble, literally, in the way the army might have done before.
Okay, the scramble option, absolutely. Mansoor, I think you want to come in on this as well.
Yeah, briefly, I can comment from my previous experience over the years, and certainly corporate contracts have a different customer service team, without a doubt. As you go into more business critical or mission critical services, and we had a few of these in the past, then it becomes more about service level agreements being negotiated, and then there's effectively negotiated liability. So, Dean, I think you're absolutely right. Liability is part of the game. There has to be skin in the game, and in my experience, these are negotiated and they're defined. And the first thing that would happen if they are triggered is that you would get service credits. So you would not necessarily pay cash. You would not, if there was an outage, a repeated outage, you would get a certain amount of services free. And then beyond that, you would actually have severe liabilities. And in my experience, when you're negotiating a large business critical contract, those are negotiated. Then internally, the technical teams will discuss with the legal and the finance teams in terms of how those risks are mitigated. Then they would agree on an amount of liabilities that need to be taken into account in the contract internally, and they would put that liability risk into the cost of the contract. So this is happening already in large-scale business critical contracts today. And as we go into the network slicing of the 5G world, they will be perhaps more softwareized, but they will certainly be part of the overall discussion. And I think those will be back-to-back negotiated with the suppliers, whether they're system integrators or vendors. Anybody's offering that service will look to see, do they have that covered back-to-back with the people who are actually supplying them the equipment and services they need to provide that service.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Mansoor. And Ian, you want to come in quickly here as well?
I think this whole question of ultra reliability, which we hear a lot from the vendors around the 5G roadmap, the 3GP roadmap, it's an example of raising expectation. New services, and the risk is if you raise expectation, whether it's in the enterprise sector or even in the consumer sector around improved latency, you risk people being dissatisfied if you can't meet that raised expectation. And I think this is one of those challenges I highlighted about technology and service quality improving. You've got to manage that changing expectation as you roll out the new things you would have charged more for.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ian. Dean, lots of comments on your question there. Let's come back to you to close out this topic.
I thought it was a really fascinating debate. I completely would agree with what Ian just said about expectation management. I thought Mansour's comments about negotiation, absolutely. Sort of Rosalind's about the backup and recovery plans. The one thing which I'm surprised by is I haven't been on a single 5G event where there's been someone from the insurance industry turn up. And I would have thought that they're a bit of a missing piece of the puzzle here, is we ought to be able to calculate the risks. But other than that, I think it's fascinating. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Dean. Well, amazingly, we have actually come to the end of our time, and we still have to get to the motion. So we're going to come to the vote now. Let me remind you what the motion is, and then we'll do our thumbs up, thumb down. So the motion is telcos are in the optimum position to manage customer happiness in an increasingly digital world. So that is the motion. Do you agree with the motion or disagree with the motion? Let's see the thumbs, please. Okay, we have mostly a disagreement here. So we have mostly votes against the motion here in the gallery. Guy, over to you. What's the mood in the studio?
Thank you, Ray. Very interesting. Well, we do the same here with our guests here. What do we all think? The motion, again, is telcos are in the optimum position to manage customer happiness in the increasingly digital world. So if you agree, thumbs up. If you disagree, thumbs down. Ooh, we have 1, 2 up, 2 up, 3 up. We've got an undecided. Thank you, Phil. Well, that's kind of, I would say roughly 50-50. My math isn't great, but that's about 50-50, I think. Well, that's what we all think. But what about our audience? Was our motion carried or defeated? So for the second time today, it's time for the industry to decide. Well, Chris, 61% in favour of the motion there. So motion carried, and by quite a sizable margin. Chris, you argued, or you presented the arguments for the motion. What do you think of that outcome?
I think everything that we've discussed here goes back to Phil Jordan's comment about providing reliable, ubiquitous connectivity. And if they don't do that, then they're not in a position to, by the way, I don't think they're in a position to manage that customer happiness, because it's the things that we do with the connectivity is what we really see. So the visibility of connectivity in many ways is down George's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yes, it helps shape what happens above it, but it doesn't manage it. So I think a lot of this conjunction of compute, storage, applications and so on, this digital economy, the telcos need to position themselves and work with those partners much more in able to support that digital ecosystem. I don't think they're in a position to manage it.
Thanks, Chris. I agree with our audience insofar that telcos are in the best position to influence customer happiness, but can they manage it? I'm not so sure about that. They're not the ones providing the majority of the digital services that customers consume. So I feel the best result they could hope for is that they can reduce the amount of complaints they receive, most of which are beyond their control anyway. I'm just feeling a bit pessimistic today, Ray. Any final positive thoughts from you on the motion result?
Well, I'm quite surprised at the actual vote from the broader TelecomTV audience. It's very optimistic, I would say. I'm not sure. I would have been giving the thumbs down as well, I'm afraid. All I hope is that my view might change over the coming year. Maybe we'll see something new that really grabs the customer's attention in the next year. Fingers crossed for the 25th year in a row.
Thank you, Ray. Well, that's our second debate concluded, and indeed the end of the second day of the Great Telco Debate Live. A reminder that we still have one more day of discussions covering 2 additional debates, and they're juicy ones. We've got investment and hyperscalers coming up tomorrow. Check the website for details of timings and for your chance to submit a question. And if you haven't yet watched the witness statements, then please do so. You'll find them on the Great Telco Debate page on TelecomTV. The 3 of us will hopefully be back tomorrow with even more returning expert witnesses and a whole new gallery of guests. It's back to 4 p.m. UK time for our final programme. So a big thank you to all our guests for taking part today and to all our sponsors and partners. Until tomorrow, from all of us at the Great Telco Debate, thank you and goodbye.